I'm going to discuss the Seven Years' War, an event that took place between 1756 and 1763. It is considered to be the first global war because it took place on three different stages in North America, in Europe, and in India, and various other colonial possessions of the time. So, this war mostly consists of a few themes that are very prevalent in Europe during this time. That was one of empire and the struggle to attain colonies in order to gain natural resources in order to become a more wealthy nation and a more powerful nation in Europe. It involved complicated politics in Europe, having to do with monarchy and having to do with tradition, and overall just a struggle to become powerful in Europe, powerful abroad, and to have the most prestigious empire possible. So, in order to understand the Seven Years' War, we have to understand the diplomatic revolution, which was the reversing of alliance partners of the time. So, what was first? England here and Austria earlier in the War of Austria's Succession, and Prussia and France became England and Prussia and France and Austria. And this was because Britain and Prussia signed the Westminster Convention in 1756, and as a result, without consulting their alliance partners, that's very problematic. If you sign something with your enemy and don't talk to your friend about that, that's really problematic. But they did this because Prussia panicked that Russia would invade them. And it was one of Prussia's biggest fears was that Russia would invade. And this was because after the War of Austria's Succession, Austria hated Prussia because Prussia seized Silesia from them, and Austria was looking for an ally to help them to defeat Prussia. And England was also considering signing a contract with Russia to protect Hanover, which is here, which was the source of the British crown. This is where all of their kings came from. So there are many years where there were a couple of kings, I'm not sure how many, but where the British kings spoke German as a first language. So the diplomatic revolution is embodied by this feud between Maria Theresa of Austria and also the Holy Roman Empress, so she's really the most important in the Holy Roman Empire, and Frederick the Great of Prussia. This feud was sparked, as I mentioned earlier, by Frederick in the War of Austria's Succession, invading Silesia and being able to keep it. And this caused the alliance between Austria and Britain to break down, but this also just really sparked the violent nature of the Seven Years' War as well. The fact that Austria was determined to see Prussia lose and determined to fight until they got Silesia back and Austria reestablished itself as the main power in Europe. So, because of all of the complicated negotiations that I've mentioned earlier, where Prussia's fearing a Russian invasion and they signed the Westminster Convention, and all of these things are up in the air, and basically the tension is so much that you can really just cut it with a knife. And Frederick the Great, as demonstrated in the War of Austria's Succession, was not one to wait for something to happen. He invaded Silesia because he wanted to make the first move and catch people off guard and be the person who would be prepared for the situation. So he was fearing a invasion from Russia, and as a result, he figured he might as well not wait for Russia to invade Silesia, this territory I discussed earlier, very resource rich, very valuable at the time. He decides to invade Saxony on August 29th, 1756. And as a result, he faces more encirclement, but at the same time, he quickly defeats Saxony and he forces Saxony to join forces with him. He enjoys a series of victories in 1756, establishes himself once again as a military hero, and is very successful and further angers the other European powers, but it quickly becomes evident that he needs a lot of support and that his military genius isn't enough to make this war, to carry out this war till the end without any further assistance. So meanwhile, like I said earlier, this is a war that consists of two main wars, one in Europe and one in North America. So here we have, represented by these different colors, the different colonial powers. We have the British colonies, we have Spain as well, and then we have France. And the main point of contention was in this area, in the Ohio Valley, a region just due to how fertile it was and its crucial region bordering the two empires. And the struggle in North America was really dominated by the struggle to gain this in order so that the British colonists could move west, and or so that the French could stop the British colonists from moving west. But what is important also to note is how the British Navy played such a crucial role in being able to establish dominance over this region, and the fact that they virtually focused all of their forces in the North American War. They did provide some support to Frederick the Great in the Hanover region, the place where the British monarchy comes from, like I mentioned earlier. They support Prussia in that, but most of all, they want to focus all of their energy and resources in North America because they believe that gaining all of these resources and gaining prestige from winning this war will gain them power and dominance over Europe. France, on the other hand, has the opposite approach and wanted to dominate the European continent and that way defeat Britain. Okay, so as I discussed earlier, there was problems between Russia and Prussia. And one of the main problems was that Elizabeth III, the empress of the time, actually I'm not sure if she's Elizabeth III, but Elizabeth of Russia at the time, she had a personal vendetta against Frederick. She hated him, and one of her main goals in the war was to see that Prussia was torn apart and partitioned. So as you can see, Prussia was not very popular at the time. He was stirring up trouble left and right, and he just didn't have that many fans. But then what takes place is the so-called miracle of the House of Brandenburg, where she suddenly dies. All of a sudden, no one expects it, when Frederick is at his point of the height of his weakness. And then she is immediately replaced by this guy here, Peter III of Russia, who's actually a Prussophile, and decided to immediately withdraw troops from Berlin and from Germany, and decides to immediately exit the war. And this is extremely important because it gave Frederick the time to coordinate his efforts against Austria, finally kind of scrape what he could from the British before the end of the war, and focus on his main objectives. And in the end, it all turned out fine. Prussia and Britain win, and as a result of this, there are two separate treaties for the two separate wars within the 7 Years' War. The Treaty of Hubertusburg ends the one in Central Europe, and the Treaty of Paris concludes the war between Britain and France. So what this war results in is Britain finally establishes itself as the main colonial power in North America. It asserts more power in its other colonies as well. Prussia became a powerful force in Europe for the first time, an extremely powerful force, and it really sparks the Prussian-Austrian hostilities that are continued throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. And another important thing to note is how this is related so closely with the American Revolution. George Washington was an unsuccessful general in this war at the beginning, and the end of the war. At the end of the war, Britain was so financially strained that it had to ask the American colonists for financial support, which they were not willing to do, as is famous, and it also sparked the distrust of the American colonists of British soldiers, and it really just it really just represents the nature of European politics at the time, and imperial struggle, and balance of power, and all of these issues just become reinforced in further wars at the time.